Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we have quite an international setup here. My name is Tim. I'm joining you from a hotel room in Sydney, Australia, and I'm joined by my good friend Christian, who's based in Copenhagen, Denmark, from the Microsoft team. And today, we've got a topic I think that Christian and I seem to talk about almost on a daily basis. There's a lot of, I think, education that the industry is kind of looking for on bringing together and harmonizing data. We've got a couple of key pieces of technology to bind together. We're going to be providing some pretty good demonstrations, Christian and I, and this is all really about building that end-to-end story of a good supply chain of data with CluedIn, with Microsoft Purview, and of course with Microsoft Fabric as well. Christian, let's head to the next slide and introduce each other. My name is Tim. I come from the CluedIn team. I've been working with the CluedIn team for the last 10 years. I spend a lot of my time with CluedIn customers, all focused on really getting data ready for insight. We are a native MDM solution and data quality solution in the Microsoft ecosystem. Our product team spends our time making sure that we build integrations into every single product within the product suite of Microsoft, everything, of course, from Purview and Fabric. But if we would extend this into the Power Platform, into Azure AI Foundry, Copilot Studio, and so much more. As for a little bit of structure for the webinar that we have here, Christian and I welcome questions. We love questions. So there's a Q&A section in the Teams application where you can start even from now to ask things that Christian and I can help answer. Christian, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself and kick off the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Tim, and brilliant introduction here. So my name is Christian. I am what we call a partner solution architect sitting in the Danish office. As you so nicely pointed out, an international webinar today. So I spent the past 7 or so years working on the Microsoft, you could say, data platform stack, if you will. So lots of Azure in there, lots of Purview now, lots of Fabric. And I spend most of my time talking to our great partners, such as yourselves, and some of our smaller and medium-sized customers as well. And the whole journey around becoming more data-driven that we just see to be talking so much about these days. So with that said, I think we can sort of head into to our agenda for today, right? And it's really all about getting governance in place, right? And I'm hearing this from pretty much everyone that I talk to, right? We need to get governance in place because we want to become data driven, right? We want to be able to take business decisions on the basis of reliable data. But if we don't have that governance in place, if we don't have our security in place around this, then everything that we do sort of becomes risky because then we start taking decisions on top of data that might not be reliable. And once we do that, then the decisions that we actually make are sort of compromised, right? So we become data driven, but the decisions are not the right ones because the data that we're basing them off of is essentially not up to the standard that we would like. Governance, I've never seen as much interest in this, and I think it's driven partly by AI interest, partly by all of the regulation that we see, and then of course the increased competitiveness that we see sort of in the general market. Everything is just moving faster, and we need to be able to make those decisions fast. And what we see sort of from a Microsoft standpoint is sort of this duality, I like to say, is that we don't necessarily have good governance of our data, right? We don't even, in some cases even have an inventory of the data that we have as an organization. And that means, as we see sort of here in the middle, right, we can't activate the data because we don't even know what we have, right? It might be in different parts of our organization. It might be, tacit knowledge with parts of the people who've been with us for a long time. And that really sort of presents a problem that we can't activate the data because we would really like to do so, whether we want to build AI models, we want to just build reporting, wherever we are on that journey, we just, want to become more data driven. And at the same time, we have you could say the other side of the coin here is that we also want to be able to secure the data that we have, right? So if we want to build AI models and we want to build reporting on top of it, and especially if we want to let things loose, such as, co-pilots and all of this great technology, then we also need to be able to secure that data, because people getting access to data that they shouldn't have is of course a concern in any organization. And if you combine the two sides of it, that we don't necessarily know what we have, or it might not be well governed, and that we might not have the security in place around it, then we really have a challenge. And that often results also in challenges around adhering to sort of regulatory requirements, because we don't really know what data we have. And so reporting on that data or reporting on our initiatives around how we're governing data can become problematic. And I think that, is as salient as ever with the increased pace of, you could say, technological solutions that we're seeing out there. And we've been talking about data governance for many years. I mean, at least the past 20 years. I myself have not been here that long, but I can definitely see this is something that's been going on for a long time, and it's actually quite difficult. And that's one of the reasons why we are still talking about it these days, right? Because there are different sort of obstacles to achieving good data governance in pretty much any organization. The first one is around the fragmentation that we have in our data, in our organization, around where we're storing the data, right? So it might be data silos, it might be tacit knowledge, stored on someone's laptop somewhere, but data lives in different parts of our organization. It could be departmental, so HR has some data, marketing has some data, logistics has some data, but the data is not integrated. We don't really have an overview of where it is, and maybe you also have some sort of gatekeeping around it, that this is our data in our part of our organization, and we don't really want to share it with everyone, because this is sort of what makes us important. So there is fragmentation in almost any organization as soon as it gets above even a moderate size, because nobody's really has this centralized inventory of where it is. And then the second part, which is also kind of problematic, is when this, you could say, the data estate grows, then we need to establish the data governance. But data governance is not a one-time thing. It's not a project that you complete and then you're done. Then you're on to better things. Data governance is an ongoing, you could say, investment of resources, so that we start out, we define our governance and we work with it, and then we need to sort of maintain it. And having the resources to maintain that can often be challenging in organizations. I often see data governance is sort of tacked on to somebody's existing list of tasks, right? So it becomes something that's not really a focus for anyone in particular, because the responsibility gets spread out, and it's not a top priority in organizations. And it does take time, right? It takes time to govern data well. Somebody has to sit down and has to actually look at it and evaluate it. What is it? How are we using it? Should we be using it like this? So that is, of course, really, when you're constrained on resources, this is often one of the first things that sort of, starts to fall between the cracks. And then in some organizations, we sort of see a centralization of governance, right? Because it lives out in these different fragmented areas with the data. So we establish a central data office, or it could be a BI team, or it could be the central IT team for that matter. But you establish a centralized governance of it, but then it sort of becomes this almost policing type of organ. Can also become very bureaucratic in terms of who actually owns the responsibility for the data. So whenever you want access to it, you have to go through maybe some cumbersome processes. It might take days, weeks, months even to get to the right data that you want to use. And at the same time, it doesn't really encourage, you could say, a lot of data-driven decision making if you have to wait that long to actually be able to get the insights that you want to base your decisions off of. So it has this tendency to be connected to a little bit of a sort of a negative spiral around governance. And it doesn't mean that centralized governance is bad. It just means you have to consider how you do it. And then last but not least, we have sort of the technical interfaces that are always relevant to talk about, because data governance is not really a supremely technical discipline. It's very much around process and methodology and ownership in an organization, but it does have an element of, you could say, technical interfaces, in the sense that we need to actually be able to have systems that sort of speak the same language, are able to connect to one another, so that we can actually do this in an automated, scalable fashion when we want to implement technology. Because otherwise we're back to these super labor-intensive tasks if things have to be done manually each and every time. So technical interfaces matter in terms of being able to scale this in an efficient manner. And what we are seeing sort of from the Microsoft perspective is that we've tried different models ourselves, and that's really the heart of Purview, you could say, is sort of a representation of our own journey towards better data governance as an organization. So we had initially a centralized data organization. So I went through this, where you could see that we had it was a strong responsibility at the core, as you would say, but the business, which is part of where I sit, there wasn't a lot of agility, because there was a very bureaucratic system in terms of being able to actually access and utilize data. So we went for a decentralized model a couple of years back then, where we got tons of agility at the edge, and the businesses became owners of data themselves. But we also see the increasing requirements around regulation and privacy, and also security for that matter, where we get all of this agility, but then the responsibility for things that are not necessarily only for one business but needs to go across, that becomes difficult when all you have this sort of mesh style architecture here with no responsibility at the center. And hence we've moved ourselves towards this sort of federated model, where some things are governed centrally, and then you have the ability to delegate part of it to the edge. So there's some ownership at the edge. You involve the business, but certain things you keep at a centralized point. And that's really also how you could say Microsoft Purview data governance has been designed, essentially to allow the best of both worlds. Yeah, and the idea is to essentially be able to address, you could say, the activation part, that we want you to be able to confidently activate the data that you have, because you've been able to take an inventory of what you have, so you can actually find the data in your organization. And then we of course want you to also be able to secure that data in different ways, so that you also feel confident in actually utilizing that data and letting people go look for things. So that's sort of the foundation for Purview and the vision that we have. And Purview data governance is actually, you could say, one of 3 solutions right now in what we call Microsoft Purview. So this was new, coming out, I think it was the 1st of September that it officially launched, where you could say the old Azure Purview was sort of developed into what we call Purview data governance, the central of these solutions that handles things like data quality, data cataloging, data management, data estate health, and so on. So disciplines that traditionally, I like to say, they sort of revolve around sort of organizational or systems-based data. So what we have in our data lakes, what we have in our SQL servers, what lives out there. Whereas you could say the other 2 parts of the Purview suite, data security and data compliance, sort of play a little bit of different roles. On the data security side, a little bit more around, you could say, data that the individual owns, SharePoint, and so on and so forth. And the idea here, and where Microsoft is sort of taking this vision, is that we want to create this shared platform underneath this. So we are starting to standardize the way that we work with these things across the platform. So for instance, classification of data, something where you would imagine that standardization, is rather important for streamlining the way that you handle it and that you define it in the same way, right? But historically, we actually didn't define classification labels in the same way for our, you could say, Azure Purview solution compared to what we do over in, for instance, what we call information protection, right? So we're now bridging that gap. So we're standardizing those definitions, not just for classification, but sort of across, reusability of data connectors, being able to apply policies across these solutions. And the idea is that, data governance and data security and data compliance are not really completely distinct disciplines. It's all part of what any organization needs to handle these days. And of course, you want to try and handle it as a single solution rather than as separate entities. And with that said, I think it's time to jump a little bit into the demo that Tim and I have prepared. So I'll start out on my end and then hand a little bit over to Tim, and then I'll get it back a little bit later to kind of round off our demo here. But what we're sort of thinking, right? Like, we'd really like to show something about, like, what is the process of sort of combining, you could say, Purview data governance with CluedIn and what's sort of the end-to-end value chain of bringing your data up to a standard where you can make, you could say, data-driven decisions on top of it. So we have a rather simple scenario, admittedly, right? But you could imagine that you sit somewhere in your organization. It could be the marketing department. Say, I want to build a report of our customers. And what we would like to show you here is, okay, so let's start out in Purview. Let's imagine that we need to go look for the data that we have around what customers we have. So we'll do that in Purview. And as you'll see, maybe we come to the conclusion that we're not completely on top of the records that we have here. And that's where we bring in CluedIn and the whole idea of master data management, which is not something that we do natively in Purview. It's something where we integrate to great partner solutions like CluedIn. So Tim will take you through that part, and then hopefully we can get some great data back that we can build a report on top of. So with that said, I'm just going to jump out of the PowerPoint here and actually hopefully go to Microsoft Purview data governance, which I'm hoping that you can all see. So this is the Microsoft Purview portal here for data governance, where we can see we can handle all of these different solutions. But where I would like to start in terms of just giving you some insight into this solution is actually just to quickly start at what we call the data map, because I've talked about this idea of building an inventory of what assets do we have as an organization. So what data do we have? And the data map is this underlying infrastructure that is sort of the basis for everything that we bring into Purview. So Purview is designed around this idea of domains, this idea that a domain could be HR, it could be marketing, it could be sales. I've just created a few here. Domains are really this idea of being able to delegate part of, you could say, your governance to your organization. So certain things can be handled centrally and other things can be sort of distributed out to the domain. So just to show you this in a sort of more visual manner, what we have in our little sort of demo environment here is what we call a data map of our little organization. So we have a couple of these domains, marketing, sales, and then there is a core default one. We can register our different data assets in here. So for instance, we have some Microsoft Fabric, we have an Azure Data Lake here for our marketing department, we have some Azure files here, and then over in sales, we could, for instance, integrate to things like Dataverse or another data lake and maybe some SQL tables, right? So this is the way that we are, you could say, bringing in data to our platform. And then essentially we run scans of that data, and that means that the underlying infrastructure, it goes and looks through these different data sources and figures out what data do we actually have in these different sources. Right? And that's the beauty of getting the scalability in here and maybe removing some of the labor intensity of having to do everything manually. Right? And once these scans go off, we can figure out what data we have, and then we can bring it into a data catalog. So this is the way that we bring it in. So if we go to the data catalog, so this idea of building an inventory of what we have, you can imagine now, back to the scenario, that I want to build a report of our customers. So maybe I go and search for customer. That could be one way of going about it, right? And now this is a relatively small environment that we're in, right? And we already have quite a few files here that have different names and column names. The search is rather broad, so everything that sort of relates to customers already gets pulled in, right? But you can imagine in a large installation of Purview, you might have thousands of possible documents, right? So we can of course go and filter it by different types. So it could, for instance, be that if we're sitting in marketing and we want to build our report, maybe we want to see what did we actually have in our marketing collection, right? So we're bringing it down to definitely fewer assets or documents here, right? And we'll just leave the output now because that's going to be used a little bit later, right? But you can imagine, for instance, that we have essentially a customer CSV that might be interesting, that might hold some data that we could use to build our report. But if we go and look here, right, we can see maybe somebody else has already been looking at this. This doesn't look all that great, right? 2 stars somebody gave it, maybe not the best type of data, but we can still get some insights into it, right? So Purview has gone off. It has essentially brought in the different column names here, and it's found any classifications that were in there sort of naturally, in this case some physical addresses, the country code that was available. And all of this is sort of done with system classifiers. You can also build your own if you want to look for different types of data, as long as you are basically able to build an expression for that, right? So maybe this is not the best record in the world. We also have you could say another file here, which is called customers. You will notice that it's actually located sort of in the same place. And if we go look at the schema for this, it has column names that look quite similar to what we had in the other one, right? So there was a name, there was a company name, there was a DUNS number, there was a street address. Now we have an address, right? So it looks quite similar. Now, of course, if we go back and we, you could say, look again for customer, we might think, okay, maybe our sales organization might have some data, right? We are marketing, maybe sales has something. So if we look for the same thing, we go to the collection, we look at, what does sales have? Maybe they have something, right? We find different SQL tables, but we might also figure that, find something like, oh, maybe this is an extraction from our Dataverse, right? So somebody's extracted some customer data from that. It has a little bit of a better rating here. Maybe we go look at that, right? So if we open that up and we go and look, okay, so what's the schema here, right? Okay, so that looks kind of similar as well. And this sort of really highlights sort of the problem that we get into when we don't have master records, right? We have different pieces of information in different files, and now we don't know what is actually the right one. So just to showcase for you before we hand it over to Tim, I have these exact files in here. Oops. So for instance, this Dynamics customer list. So, you can see what this file actually looks like. So a CSV file with a number of different, in this case, Danish companies, addresses, and so on and so forth. And if I go in here and look at the customer list, so the 2 other files we were actually looking at. So if I open this one up, we'll see the same again, a lot of the same companies from Denmark, with a lot of, a lot of similarity in, the column names and there. But how do we consolidate now these 3 different files into one, you could say, master record, so we know who is our customer actually, right? Because if I want to build the report, now I don't know which is the right document or file to build it on top of. And I think with that said, I'd like to hand it over to you, Tim, now to maybe showcase a little bit around how can the integration to, CluedIn help you, move along the value chain of actually creating, valuable insight that you can build on top of for your organization.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christian. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to steal that from you and take over. And we're going to take over exactly where Christian ended, which was Microsoft Purview. Now, as I think Christian did a good job of, he alluded to this kind of idea that Microsoft Purview ticks many of the data governance boxes for us. It's got all the solutions around kind of the defensive elements of governance we all know, like security and privacy and compliance and ISO certifications and all of those things that allow us to continue to run as businesses. And then there's all the offensive elements, the things that are about value add. And I think of this as a top line and a bottom line as well. One of those elements is the unified catalog. So the catalog, as you can imagine, has this asset search. Christian just used this before to search for customers. And he came back with a pretty typical kind of setup where often when you type in things like customers, and I'll just give it a go right here on my side, is that it comes back sometimes with an overwhelming amount of results. And we have to use a couple of classic techniques like what is the highest rated? Is it tagged with certain terms that give me the impression that maybe that's the particular file that we want to use to build our reports. With our experience at CluedIn, working with Purview, working with Microsoft Fabric, it's usually something a little bit in between. It's usually that actually our customer data is scattered across multiple files. And each team often thinks they've got the final list, the golden list. And as Christian alluded to in his kind of glimpse into the data is, it looks like we've got multiple files representing the same customers, but they've got different variations of the data. They've got different. Sometimes it's called company ID. Are these the same concepts? Can I treat them like that? Essentially, CluedIn's job is to make sure that when we get and discover data from Microsoft Purview, it's ready for insight. It's ready to use. So you can imagine what we don't want is we don't want the 3 files that Christian has highlighted before with 25, I think it was, companies in each file. We don't want 75 files, do we, Christian? No. There isn't 75 companies there. There's 25, but we need to consolidate that data together. Now, one of the things that Microsoft Purview adds, and I know Christian will add a little bit of color to this after the demonstration as well, is this concept of data products. Think of data products as this abstraction over the asset catalog, where in my asset catalog, I clearly have 39 results when I search for customers. However, I probably want to give something a little bit different out to my business. I want to give them the ability to search more curated assets, things that have gone through the business. The concept that Microsoft Purview encapsulates for this, and also something that's kind of captured the industry over the last 12 months, 14 months, is this concept of a data product. So in Microsoft Purview, we have created this data product called the single view of the customer. And we've used Purview to describe it. We've used Purview to also list some of the use cases we intend to do and implement with this data. This is the kind of creative part of the process. And as we go down, we hit our brick wall. We hit our brick wall, which is, okay, I've got cust.csv customers and Microsoft Dynamics customers. And we have to ask the question, okay, so which file is correct? Or is it all of them are correct? And okay, at this point, this data isn't necessarily ready to use because there's a lot more we need to do to prepare this data. Now, if you are joining from a data engineering background on this call, first of all, welcome. Second of all, this is something that's usually thrown to you. You need to take this data, clean it, prepare it, consolidate it, and then give it back to the business so they can start using it. And the whole idea of master data management is really to bring the non-technical audience into this supply chain of data. If we can provide the business, the lines of business, with technology that allows them to actually solve this consolidation problem, that seems like an overall positive thing to do for a couple of reasons. Number one, it allows the business, who in the end of the day is responsible for this data, to rubber stamp that they have looked, consolidated, and I guess you could say curated this data. That's really important. I think for a couple of reasons. Number one is that if we hand this data to our IT and engineering team, they probably don't know the data. They probably don't know the records inside of it. They probably weren't the ones that created the data. So in a way, we're just doing our best job. We're given 3 files, we're told to clean it, but there's a lot of intricacies in data that if we get it wrong, especially for things like supply chain and automation, there's some bad things that can happen. So the good news is that CluedIn and Microsoft Purview have a native integration. So to actually connect the CluedIn and Purview system, all you need to do is set up a classic enterprise application, a service principal, connect the systems with a classic kind of client ID and client secret. Now, this is something I've done before we joined the webinar. And all I also need to do is I need to tag a data product as this particular type, master data and reference data. There are many different types of data products. There are analytical products. There are machine learning products. Make sure that if you want the automatic integration between Purview and CluedIn to be enabled, that you mark your data products as this master data and reference data type. The only other thing that we need to do, and I'm going to unpublish this right now and set it to draft, is we need to edit this data product, and we need to make sure that we tag this data product with a particular term that we're monitoring in the CluedIn platform. So let's go here and click Add. And I've created a little glossary term in Purview called Sync to CluedIn. And I've told CluedIn this is the particular glossary term that I'm wanting to monitor. And if we go ahead and publish this data product again, within the next 30 to 60 seconds, CluedIn is going to automatically pick up that this particular data product exists. And actually, it's going to do all the work to set up the integration of getting this data into the MDM platform so we can clean it and standardize it and put business rules over it. And as Christian alluded to, we can put it through some type of process of approval or 4I principle where we have multiple people from the business look at the data and give it their rubber stamp. So I'm going to head over to my CluedIn platform. And as I always say, don't blink too quickly because it turns out these are different products. This is Microsoft Purview. This is CluedIn. This is Microsoft Purview. This is CluedIn. We did this 100% on purpose to make sure the user interface, the user experience was familiar if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem. And you can see automatically from the home screen of CluedIn, we integrate nicely into Microsoft Purview and Microsoft Fabric, amongst other Azure products as well, like Azure Data Factory, Azure Data Lake, Gen 2, Copilot, just to name a few. So if we head over to our sources right now and view all the available sources in CluedIn, we can now see we've got this folder called Single View of Customer. That's the name of the data product that we have brought into the system. And actually, we can see those 3 files. Let me go back to the data product view just to show you again. So here are those 3 files that we had in our data lake. And the integration from CluedIn to Purview, not only has it synced the metadata that these files exist, but actually, if we now dive into any of these files, something interesting happens. We can see the actual records. Now, Christian showed you this. He was browsing his OneLake and he showed you the data there. But when we're dealing with the problem of consolidating data from across different systems, we definitely need to work with data at a record level. We can't just deal with metadata. That's not enough. We need to see the records inside of us. We need to see the records in front of us to be able to fix these issues. Now, do me a favor, and I think if Christian answers this, he's cheating. But in the chat, I'd be really interested to see if you can spot where some of the data quality issues are. I'm not going to stop the demonstration to wait, but I'd be really interested to see how acute everybody's eyes are in being able to spot where the data quality issues are. Now, there are obvious issues in front of us here, encoding issues, where you can see all the Danish characters like the U and the accented diacritic characters are all replaced with a question mark. Now, funnily enough, this is typically a problem you would say, oh, let's delete this data and let's import it again. And sure, that will fix the problem. But actually what we're going to do is we're going to use large language models to go off and help us find, detect, and actually fix some of these data quality issues. So to ruin the surprise for absolutely everybody, take a look at that country code, that last column right there. And we can see that there's all unique ways that people are representing the country of Denmark. We can see sometimes it's spelt in the full name. Sometimes it's actually using the Danish version, the Danish name for Denmark. Sometimes it's in different casing. As we go down, we can see we've got different spacing. Here we've got too many Ks. And here we've even got nicknames for the country of Denmark. Now, hand on heart, I have no idea if this is true. I used ChatGPT to help me generate this data. I have no offense meant if any of this means anything offensive to the Danes and the Nords, the people from Nordics that are joining us. But this is apparently what ChatGPT thinks are some of the nicknames for Denmark. Why did we bring this data in? Well, what it does is it helps us highlight that some of the data quality issues that we have are very deterministic. We can use business rules to fix them. Some of them are probabilistic, where we can use techniques to kind of make good suggestions on, hey, maybe Denmark, and Denmark should all be consolidated and standardized. But then when it comes to these types of issues with data quality, that's where we really need to lean on AI to be able to help us with this data. So the first kind of foray into AI in CluedIn starts with our Copilot. And the good news is we've been live with our Copilots with customers in production for over 18 months. We're a really early adopter of the use of AI. At CluedIn, we strongly believe that, you know, the MDM vendor that cracks the use of AI is just going to be the leading platform on the market. One of the ways that shines through is our Copilot. So as I open up my Copilot, not only can I ask it kind of, you know, general banter, like we are on a webinar with Christian from Microsoft, and we have people from US, UK, APAC, and more. Can you help with our webinar to make it great? So you've got this kind of classic communication you would expect out of using a Copilot, and you can see pretty quickly it comes back and says, yeah, of course, I hope the webinar goes well. What do you need help with? The first thing it's doing is actually coming back and making suggestions on what types of things the Copilot can help out with. Let's start with asking the system to describe the data set that we're all looking in front of us right here. And what's interesting is that if we were to use something like a ChatGPT or a, you know, like a Copilot, if we asked it to do something like describe this data set, you can probably imagine it says something like, I'm more than happy to help, upload the data, we'll start working on it, and we're going to take it from there. Now, one of the interesting things with CluedIn's Copilot is that it's already connected to the actual data itself. So in a way, that RAG is automatically set up between the Copilot of CluedIn and the data that we're dealing with. And what it allows me to then do is we can see that the Copilot has come back And it's nicely described that, hey, it looks like this record ID that you've got over here on the left-hand side, it looks like that could be used as a globally unique way to refer to these records. By the way, the data set looks like it's dealing with the business domain of companies. Yes. I've gone ahead and described every column that sits within the data. And I've also started to describe what types of validation I would want to impose onto this to kind of force that we're making data that's ready for insight. It's also recommended that our country code column could probably be used as reference data. That seems interesting. You know, we can ask it and interpret more with the data and continue on. But this is enough for me to basically go into my mapping process where, for those of you who have seen CluedIn before, I'm not going to take you through that mapping process because it's something that is available on pretty much every webinar that we've run over the last few years. But basically what I've done here is, as a data steward, I've used that guidance from the Copilot to help me map CSV files and Parquet files and Azure SQL tables just into the concept of a customer. And as I alluded to before with Christian, is that he has 25 companies across 3 different files. And what we don't want to include in is 75 company files. That is going to lead to duplicate records. It's going to lead to data quality issues. And you can see, if I actually, once I've done that mapping, that we've actually got 25 consolidated records from across those 3 files in the CluedIn platform. Now, this is already off to a good start, but what's staring us right in the middle of the screen is that damn country code, where we could go off and use some of the cleaning tools that are already available within CluedIn. Let's just give you a quick peek for those of you have not seen it before. So I might want to create a new cleaning project called Clean Our Country Codes. And here I'm going to specify the type of data that we're wanting to clean. So I'd say where the type of data equals to a customer, I would like to clean the customer keys. We're going to create a cleaning project and then generate those results. This is an interface, an application that we give off to data stewards that allows them to detect where the data quality issues are, fix the issues, and then automate given the business rules as well. Many videos that we have available on CluedIn's website that show you how this works. So here we've got this country code where we can use features like our text faceting, where it shows us all the unique ways that people are referring to Denmark as a country. In here, we can actually go off and start to use different pieces of functionality. And as we cycle through them, you can see that they're pretty good at picking up that all of these Denmarks are actually the same. And it's making a suggestion that we should probably turn them all into Denmark. Now, I can always click on any of these values and it's going to make that the actual thing we're going to normalize it into. But actually, you can imagine that it's not picking up any of the heuristic problems. So if we close this down, how on earth is this going to pick up things like the land of the Vikings, the kingdom of Denmark, that they also mean Denmark as a country? So actually, we're going to throw out the traditional techniques for this, and we're going to head over to CluedIn's AI agents. So one of the things we have noticed with running MDM projects is that it's a very human-driven initiative. We need experts from across the business. Christian used this term federation. So we need to essentially federate the work out into the lines of business to ask the domain experts, hey, we've got a problem. I've got this company record. I've got a problem with it. What do you think the fix should be? Someone put, the land of fairies into the country. Well, what does that mean? Like, can you help me fix that particular problem? You can imagine that manual effort. It introduces a lot of lag. It introduces a lot of time that's taken to go off and address these issues. So to help CluedIn customers and Purview customers scale this, CluedIn's introduced our AI agents, which are purpose-built to basically act as an extended virtual part of your team. I'm going to head into some of the templates that CluedIn ships out of the box with. And here we've got this template for an agent that's good at fixing data quality issues. Here I'm taken to our agent canvas where we can start to write the prompt of what we want these agents to do. You can see there's a little placeholder here where it says, please drag in the data that you're wanting this to fix. So I'm going to get rid of that placeholder. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to call our dataset customer. And then I'm going to use a query to go off and say where the type of data equals a customer. Let's take sampling off because we want this to run across all of the data. And I'm just going to drag and drop that data set into the agent. Effectively, what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, agent, you now have access to the customer data, and I'm going to give you some instructions on how to fix it. Now, as you can see, this prompt is very kind of high level, abstract, and generic, which means that maybe it'll find some of the more generic issues, but maybe I might need to iterate on this template to find all issues that I'm wanting to go off and fix. I'm now going to save this template, and I'm going to ask the engine to go off and test how would this work on the customer data before I'm going to commit to the types of fixes that's going off and suggesting. Now, here's the thing. When we're working with large bodies of data, these agents are built and designed to work in the background. So sometimes they might take hours to go off and fix. Sometimes if it's a smaller data set, you can see it takes a couple of seconds. But notice what it's doing is it's coming back and it's making all of these suggestions like, I think Denmark should be Denmark. I think Land of the Vikings should be Denmark. I think DK should be Denmark. I think lowercase Denmark should be Denmark. I think the land of Lego should be Denmark, right? So it's looking at the data pages at a time, and it's coming back and suggesting the types of fixes that in the end, we are going to ask some type of domain expert, a human, to go off and actually approve these suggestions. But these are some of the ways that we can kind of scale the data cleaning, the consolidation process of CluedIn. So now that we've brought this data in, we've consolidated it together, I've basically set up an outgoing stream or a push of data back to Christian in the terms of a OneLake connector, where we're pushing not 3 files back to Christian, but we're pushing a file called output out into Christian's OneLake Fabric environment. His Purview system should have scanned this flowing of data by now. So Christian, I'm going to hand back to you to show the final parts of what happens when we run our reports off clean and consolidated and mastered data, and then also to close off the session as well. So I'll stop sharing, and the floor is yours, Christian.
Thank you very much, Tim. And great to see CluedIn in action. It's always amazing. I especially love all these new agents, right, where you have all of these capabilities to really leverage LLMs to fix data quality issues. And I think this is a really great use case for LLMs. So I just love that you've already gone off and built that, right? So we can imagine, right, that we get our list back, so the output list as you were talking about. So now we have an output CSV, right? So if we open that up inside of our Fabric environment, we can see that we now have essentially one consolidated file that we can build on top of, right? So this is brilliant for our reporting, and it would be great to start building something on top of that, right? So in order to sort of move on, and you could say the value chain here we would maybe want to load this into our lakehouse essentially, which I have cheated a little bit. You can essentially, for a file like this, just right click it here, load it to a new table, and we would essentially get it in here, and we can see that, you know, the data looks beautiful. Full, you know, there doesn't seem to be any errors. We have, you know, Denmark is the country all the way around. So this is really brilliant. And really to kind of, you know, build on top of that, you know, that becomes super easy, because now we can essentially build a report, which I've also done a little, of course, bit of pre-baking around. So, you know, once we get that file back, we essentially have a quick and dirty ability to build a report on top of a SQL endpoint in our lakehouse. And we could now, you know, essentially get to this. So where we started, you know, wanting to build a report on top of our data, we are now in a position where we know we can trust the data that we have built on top of, and we can actually pretty quickly get a report up and running here in Power BI or in Fabric, and, you know, be able to filter on it, and, you know, so on and so forth that we might want to do around, you know, to figure out, you know, who are our customers actually. What I think is also really important to talk about here is that, you know, we also can bring that back into Purview, and this was what I alluded to before. So the output CSV here, right? We also, you know, Purview can also, of course, scan that, and, you know, we're able to identify that. So, you know, in the future, it becomes possible to, you know, quickly find this data. You know, we can do things like certification of that data, so we know this is, you know, trustworthy data. We can also see that somebody has been in rating it, and that really allows us to bring that process, you know, quickly around the next time somebody needs to build something on top of our data. I think a very important point that you also raised, right now, this is a singular asset that we have. So allow me to quickly jump back into our presentation to sort of round this off, and hopefully that works very well. So should be able to see the slides again here. So you sort of alluded to this idea of data products, right? And what I showed before was, you know, now we can build one Power BI report on top of a file, right? But if we want to sort of, you know, create this federation, if we want to involve the business, if we want to build, you know, something that's, you know, self-service enabled, and we want to, you know, mature our governance a little bit, then this idea of being able to build data products becomes really interesting. So, you know, we have one, you know, you could say we have one file, we have one Power BI report, we might have one lakehouse table named customers, right? We can sort of, you know, if you think about it, you can bundle those together now as what we would call a data product. Could be, you know, single view of customer, as you have called it here. It could be something else, but really the idea is that now we can bundle them and manage them together from a governance standpoint. And that means that we can, you know, link you know, this data now to important glossary terms, such as how do we define a customer, right? Because that's been part of this process. We can add in, you know, critical data elements, such as it could be customer names, customer street addresses. It could be, you know, anything that we really have in our data that we really want to be able to track in a detailed manner. So Purview can do, you know, a lot more than what we've just shown here, but this was sort of to get the idea of this value chain, and now we can work with sort of enhancing it afterwards and describing this data product that we have. We can assign an owner to it, so we can get the businesses or the business owners involved. You know, we can create policies around it. It could be that, you know, for this data product, maybe we want to create policies around how this data can be used. Maybe, you know, you need to read some documentation internally before you are approved to get access to this. So I think that, you know, the idea of data products allows us to really sort of step up in the way that we govern the data that we have beyond just the asset, but more starting to think in terms of, you know, data products are things that help us answer business questions, such as who are our customers. And I think that's really powerful. And it enables also, you know, what we would say as self-service in here. So imagine that we create the data product of Power BI report, table, and so on. Now, if somebody else in an organization, right, it's super easy. It's just you and me sitting here, and we can relatively easily get access. But you imagine in a larger organization where you don't necessarily know who approves it or who do you have to ask, and maybe it's not the owner who approves it, or maybe it requires more than one approver. Well, then we have this whole ability of actually doing self-service access from within Purview, where you are able to request access to the data that you actually find in the catalog. You're able to set up the approvers. You're able to set up attestations that you need to adhere to when you get access to this, and you can sort of handle the approval process from within Purview. So I think that overall this is super powerful for really enabling governance at scale out there. So I think that was what we wanted to show around, you could say, the product itself for Purview. I promise to very quickly also just because hopefully now you're thinking okay, this Purview looks interesting, but how much does it cost? And there was recently a change done in how Purview was priced, and I've tried to encapsulate it as simply as I can in here, that as an organization you might have your total data estate, everything that you could imagine that you have in your organization on your platform, what we would call unregistered assets, the dark blue circle here. And then you start, you go off and you scan all the data that you have. You want to bring it into Purview so that you can start figuring out what do we actually want to build our data products on top of? What do we want to build critical data elements around? So this middle blue color, we bring in a lot of that data, but that doesn't actually mean that it costs you anything, because the new Purview pricing model, which started here in January, is actually that you're only paying for curated assets. And what that really means is it's assets that are linked to a data product or a critical data element or an important business concept in there. And just to quickly showcase it here, right? What are you actually paying for Purview, right? You're paying 50 cents per month per unique governed asset. So if you imagine that down here in the bottom in the platform, you might have, a total of 9 assets. Yes, assets. You have 3 data products that you have built on top of it. There are 9 assets in these data products, but you're actually only using 6 assets from your total platform out of the 9. And hence you would only be billed in this scenario $3 per month for actually doing this. Then if you want to go and do data quality scans and some other things, there's some processing around that. But my message around the pricing of Purview is it's really easy to get started. It does not cost a lot, especially compared to the rest of what I see we're spending on data platforms out there. So if you are looking for a governance solution to get started, I think Purview is a great place to get started, because we're talking tens, maybe hundreds of dollars, but compared to what's being spent on a full data platform, this is really simple way to get started. And of course, I think I'll hand it back to you, Tim, just to round it off for your where you can.
How good are we at time, Christian? How good is that?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So maybe we finish with some call to action. So first of all, you can obviously see that Christian and I are very interested in and focused on making sure that we have this good end-to-end data governance story with ticking a lot of the boxes of what data we have, the lineage about where it's coming from and where it's going, making sure that if we are actually delivering that throughout the business, it's got high quality and high integrity, and it's rid of duplicates, and it's just easy to pick up and start generating. This is really where that synergy between CluedIn and Purview comes in. So obviously the first question is, and Christian just alluded to this, okay, so where do I start? Well, first of all, I would just concur with Christian that, like, from a Purview perspective, you're not talking about a huge outset cost to get started. you can start in a very small part of your business. So the SaaS version of Microsoft Purview are pretty easy to get. You can use that QR code to get it. From the CluedIn side, CluedIn is installable through the Azure Marketplace, and we have a SaaS solution and a PaaS solution. The difference being that the PaaS solution 100% gets installed in your environment. The data's all with you in your tenant, abiding by all of your Azure policies. And to make kind of MDM just so easy to get started with, we've actually, from CluedIn, said the first 10,000 records are on us. So imagine that customer data that we just looked at before in the example. We had 75 records. I mean, that's you can imagine something like the number of employees that you have. That might be a great place to start. If you're a company that has less than 10,000 employees, that's a great place to start this combination. It might be that you have more than less than 10,000 products. That's also a great place to start your MDM and Purview story together. So on to the next slide, one more thing as well. I'm so sorry, Christian, you won't be joining us in FabCon in Las Vegas. I'll put a bet on for you in the commiseration. But the CluedIn team is at the FabCon in Las Vegas just in a few days from now. So hotel room, it seems to hotel room, just in another location. And we've got a booth there at CluedIn, so come and join us. And we're showing off all of our new AI agents. We've also got two major announcements with the Microsoft team. I can't say anything about it yet, but you'll have to be there to see those announcements. And then, of course, we're in Vienna with the FabCon as well. So hope to see you there as well. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Christian, as always. It was good to have that session in Copenhagen with you, but even better to have this longer session here online with our audience. So wish you a good night, Christian, or a good day, and wish our audience the rest of a good day as well. Take it easy and we'll talk soon. See you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.